wish to also welcome our guests online. Ana Cristina Neves, are you there? From the government of Portugal. She's with the Internet Registry. Thank you, Ana, for joining us. And Guilherme from UNESCO, who leads the Freedom of Speech division. We have with us a very, very exciting panel today. And the title of the event is The Global Data Compact We Need, a forward-looking agenda. I think we are in the throes of the digital compact. And we do know that a very, very key aspect of sealing the deal on the digital involves thinking through the issues of data governance and global data governance at that. So we've just received the advanced unedited version today of the Pact of the Future, to which both declarations are annexed. Annex 1 is the GDC and Annex 2 is Declaration on Future Generations. One should start this panel by acknowledging that for a long, long time, data has had an existential crisis, to be local or not. But it seems from the GDC Para 48 that, at least for now, that debate seems to be settled. And Para 48 talks about, we will promote and support interoperability between national, regional, and international data policy frameworks. In this context, we request the Commission on Science and Technology for Development to establish a dedicated working group to engage in a comprehensive and inclusive multi-stakeholder dialogue on data governance at all levels as relevant for development. And we encourage the working group to report on its progress to the General Assembly no later than the 81st session, which is 2 years from now. And this is, I think, to be read also with a very significant report that got released a couple of days ago from the high-level advisory group on AI. And the report carries many, many references to the need for looking at data standards, data definitions, in respect of AI data or training data for AI. So those of us who are interested in following digital governance would be well advised not only to pay attention to these mandates that are getting generated in the GDC, but also the mandates that are coming from other places, including the HLAB final report. What I want to do is, on behalf of a group of people, including the Global Digital Justice Forum, but thanks to two governments, the government of Colombia and the government of Portugal, along with UNCTAD and the OHCHR, we've been fortunate to host this panel with members of the Global Digital Justice Forum, Research ICT Africa, as well as Dercos Digitalis. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it right, but still. So, and we have a stellar panel, and I won't take too much time. The panel will explore some critical questions, and these are, of course, vital for the health of the economy, the health of society in times to come. How can global data governance ensure economic, social, climate, and gender justice? Certainly not a question to be debated in 1.5 hours, but we shall still give it a start. The second is to evolve principles and common standards of data governance from a do no harm and maximize benefits perspectives, which are just the bare minimum. What are some insights from national and regional experiences to go beyond? How can we bring convergences in regulatory approaches to cross-border data flows for responsible digital innovation and equitable digital economies, considering that almost all data flows in one direction these days? What data rights can protect the human rights of the most vulnerable in the transnational economy, which includes informal sector workers, small farmers and fishers, climate refugees, people on the move, migrants, indigenous peoples, and children? And we are very pleased to have FIAN International, who was also a co-proposer, and they are the people that are working very, very closely on the data rights of indigenous peoples and people engaged in food systems. How can we ensure that efforts to bridge divides in data infrastructural capabilities in the international digital order are cognizant of common but differentiated responsibilities for a just and sustainable transition? We are borrowing from discourses and debates in the climate justice debate, but needless to say, I think all of us would agree that the phraseology of common but differentiated responsibilities also pertains to the market economy of data. And that I think, a lot has been said and written, including by UN institutions through the Information Economy Report by the UNCTAD, for instance, the Digital Economy Report, which talks about the inequities in data. So how do we get to the point of innovation, democratization of innovation is what we will debate. These are some of the questions, and our esteemed speakers will focus on different aspects of these questions. So we have about 10 minutes per speaker, and maybe at the 9th minute, I would gently indicate that there's 1 more minute left. We will begin online with Anna Cristina Neves. Over to you, Anna.
Now you can hear me. You are hearing me, right?
Yes, we can hear you, Anna.
Okay, great.
Clearly.
Okay, thank you so much. So it is a true pleasure to be here today at this side event, and I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the organizers for making this possible. In particular, I wish to express my deep admiration for Anita Gurumurthy, Executive Director of IT for Change, whose unwavering commitment to fairness and dedication to elevating the principles she stands for continue to inspire me. I'd like to draw your attention to the Global Digital Compact, of course, which aims to establish a comprehensive and inclusive framework for data governance. So this framework seeks to balance the protection of privacy and human rights with the promotion of innovation, economic development, and international cooperation. By leveraging national and regional experiences, such as the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, normally known as the GDPR, the US sectoral approaches and perspectives from the developing world, the GDC aspires to harmonize global data governance principles, ensuring a digital future that is both equitable and secure for all. In this context, I acclaim the Global Digital Compact for requesting to the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, the CSTD, which I am one of the vice chairs, to establish a dedicated working group to engage in a comprehensive multi-stakeholder dialogue on data governance, relevant to development across all levels, while serving all the Sustainable Development Goals. The GDC calls for this working group to report its progress to the General Assembly by 2026, including follow-up recommendations towards equitable and interoperable data governance arrangements. These may encompass fundamental principles of data governance at all levels relevant to development, proposals to support interoperability between national, regional, and international data systems, considerations on sharing the benefits of data, and options for facilitating safe, secure, and trusted data flows, including cross-border data flows as they pertain to development. Should the GDC be endorsed at this Summit of the Future, the CSTD will have a unique opportunity to engage all stakeholders in a multi-stakeholder approach to this pivotal issue of data governance. The CSTD plays a crucial role in offering high-level advice on science, technology, and on the implementation of the World Summit for Information Society and Development policy to member states. Its discussions on data governance focus on balancing the ethical use of data with innovation, privacy, and equitable access to digital technologies. So I am more than confident that the CSTD will be well positioned to lead a thorough and insightful discussion on the key aspects of data governance, producing recommendations to be presented to the United Nations General Assembly by 2026 on 1. Data as a driver for sustainable development. 2. Ethical and inclusive data governance. 3. Bridging a digital divide and promoting equity. 4. Cross-border data flows and international cooperation. 5. Data protection and privacy. 6, artificial intelligence, big data and emerging technologies. 7, capacity building and knowledge sharing. 8, sustainable and responsible data governance. It will be tough, but in fact, in the discussions on data governance held in April this year, the CSTD advocated for global cooperation, robust data protection policies, and for the inclusive participation of all stakeholders, being governments, private sector, civil society, technical and academia communities, and marginalized communities. So we want all this inclusive participation of all these stakeholders in shaping the future of data governance. Evolving principles and common standards for data governance from a do no harm to maximize benefits perspective involves learning from the diverse experiences of national and regional data governance frameworks. Different countries and regions have developed approaches that balance innovation, privacy, and ethical use of data while minimizing risks and maximizing benefits. Let us hope that the Global Digital Compact will be endorsed within the Pact for the Future, allowing us to begin working towards a world where data governance fosters greater fairness and a brighter future for humanity. Thank you very much for your attention. I now hand the floor to you, Anita. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we hope you can stay on because at the end, maybe there will be questions.
Of course.
That we would
My
like
pleasure.
to request you to take on. So I have immense pleasure in welcoming Juan Jose Martinez Badillo, the Chief of UNCTAD at the New York office. Thank you so much for joining us at very short notice. And we recognize the significant role of UNCTAD in shaping an equitable digital and data economy. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm very glad to see Anna. I shouldn't say this to the current CSTD chair, but I usually call her my favorite CSTD chair. But yes, absolutely. As you know, UNCTAD is a secretary of the CSTD, and we also have been doing important work in particularly the intersection of development and digitalization and the digital economy, how to deliver a digital economy that it's actually conducive to development and not only a digital economy that reinforces some of the existing gaps. So I want to thank the organizers for inviting us today. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay throughout. It's as it happens to many of us this week, and it's a very crazy agenda, so we are running from one to the other, but very glad to be here. I will perhaps focus particularly on how we see, based on UNCTAD's research, that environment that led in which the Global Digital Compact was adopted, and perhaps what we could have seen better in the Digital Compact, and how we see the way forward in particular. So the research that we have been doing, and this is an issue that we have been covering for many years, UNCTAD received the mandate on the digital economy already in 2016 under UNCTAD 14 in Nairobi, with the creation of an intergovernmental group of experts and a program on particularly e-commerce and the digital economy. And what we see is that the digital divide is growing and continues to grow. So 2023, for instance, if we look at ITU numbers, 27% of people in low-income countries, only 27% of people in low-income countries use the internet. So there's a very, we're talking about something that it's still unknown to a large group, a large part of the population that remains out of this equation. And of course, there's the inequality in data that hinders the participation of developing countries in the global data economy. Because at the end, when we talk about the digital economy, the main asset that exists for most of the company, the main comparative advantage, comes from data. So what we see, and the particular argument that we're trying to make, is that developing countries must not be relegated to just using, consuming, and importing the goods and the services, but they must have the capability to actually use that data to innovate and to create policy. And this is where the whole issue that had been raised at the beginning, it's whether data is global, is local, and who owns it, and where it is stored, and how it can be used. So that is where we feel that the Digital Compact and other fora like the CSTD give that voice for developing countries to then have a say and agency in the digital economy, and not to have a dynamic where global countries, global South countries, simply import data and export data, and which is used for the benefit of others. One of the main issues that we see, in particular looking at the GDC, is one of the issues that could have come through more clearly, but it is a dynamic that we have to take into account in the future, is the market concentration. So basically we have 5 platforms that earn more than 70% of global advertisement revenue. 2 countries account for half of the world hyperscale data centers and the highest rates of 5G adoption in the world. 95% of the funding of artificial intelligence startups in the past 5 years is also in 2 countries, and 70% of the world's top AI researchers, as well as 90% of the market capitalization of digital platforms. So we are really, when we look at the digital economy, we're talking particularly with 2 countries dominating completely this landscape. So we need a more level playing field. Data is very important in leveling that playing field. And Anna, I don't have to elaborate to what Anna has said about the work that the CSTD can bring. We're very happy that this mandate came at the end. It was a very difficult conversation. The Mission of Colombia, I believe they are also one of the organizers, but Jorge is not here with us yet. The Mission of Colombia was one of the key drivers to make sure that this was in the final document. There were a couple of missions that really took this as a flag, and we helped particularly to bring to the fore the work that the CSTD has done so that they could be building on that, because Anna would attest, this is a game of trust. So you have to be able to take the steps step by step so that member states can actually be ready to take the next step. And there was already a step that had been taken in Geneva that the GDC could then build on. And this is where, making this connection, we help bring move the ball a little bit further into the goal. So we have a GDC that hopefully will bring some of the elements, and Anna has elaborated on the CSTD priorities. And I think we as UNCTAD remain committed to helping bring to reality those priorities. And Anna as Vice President, Ambassador Ka of Gambia as the President, have been driving that process from the political side. Maybe just to say a few words, and perhaps in terms of the Digital Compact, some of the elements, the Digital Economy Report was mentioned, and this is perhaps the new dimension that we need to be paying more attention to, is the interface of the digitalization and the growth of digitalization and the environment. Because we have, for instance, this is the focus of the UNCTAD Digital Economy Report 2024 that was issued some weeks ago, actually, about 2 months ago already. And it's precisely because of that angle of both of pollution, but of greenhouse gas emission, consumption of water, consumption of electricity that is increasing. And particularly as the computing capacity of AI needs to increase many-fold to be able to feed the new models. So we see that nowadays 3.2% of global gas emissions, greenhouse gas emission, comes from ICT, but this number will double by 2026. We're talking about, in 2022, only 400 terawatt hours of electricity, which is huge. Google consuming in 2022 5.6 billion gallons of water. That's enough water for 2 million people. Microsoft has water consumption of 6.4 million cubic meters. Digital waste is increased 30% to 10.5 million tons globally, and this is going to keep on growing. So this is perhaps one dimension that we need to be paying more attention, particularly as things continue to grow. The computing capacity of AI continues to grow. So we need to make sure that we intersect the two dimensions of the problem. Internet of Things, more and more devices, not typical devices that were used to being connected, but also microwaves and refrigerators and all will grow from 16 billion devices to a projected 39 billion devices, so almost more than twofold. by 2029, so in 5 years. So we are this issue we're trying to bring up more as balancing the two, balancing the digitalization, but in a way that also we reduce the footprint and we make sure that we balance the two policies. So we at UNCTAD here in New York, but of course my colleagues in Geneva, who are the ones we're a political liaison office. Our job is to connect to the member states and to make sure that we bring these elements into discussion. But my colleagues in Geneva, that particularly IT for Change and colleagues Anna have been working with, are the ones driving that agenda. We'll be supporting the CSTD in this work to deliver data for development, data that can actually help in this, and ultimately to contribute to a more equal and fairer digital economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think we are getting started with the working group deliberations on a very, very optimistic note that good things will come out of it. And as Anna said in the passing, it's going to be difficult. And I think recognizing that it's going to be difficult is important, because all of us here actually come from many social movements that concern ourselves, not just with data as an economic good, but also as a very, very important part of livelihood ecosystems and natural ecosystems. So that certainly means balancing the mandates for digitalization in global governance with many other mandates. So thank you very much. I, at this point, wanted to draw attention to the report governing AI for humanity that got released September 19th by the UN from the HLAB. And just wanted to say that there are several paragraphs in that that are very noteworthy with respect to this call to ethics and a very strong, and I would really say unequivocal critique of how the data economy today is organized. So they don't mince words at all. So it's a very honest report. But like with most such reports, I think the critique seems to be a shared sentiment with much of civil society. But when we look at the solutions, I think the political will needs to be really mobilized. And 176, para number 176 says, steps to address these issues at the national and regional level are promising, with the public and private sector paying more attention to best practices. Yet, without a global framework governing AI training data sets, commercial competition invites a race to the bottom between jurisdictions on access and use requirements, making it difficult to govern the AI value chain internationally. Only global collective action can promote a race to the top in the governance of the collection, creation, use, and monetization of AI training data in ways that further interoperability, stewardship, privacy preservation, empowerment, and rights enhancement. So many words there, and hopefully we will move in the direction of realizing rights enhancement and empowerment for all. I would thank you and move to Guilherme Canela Godoy, the Chief of the Section for Freedom of Expression and Safety of Journalists at UNESCO. We're extremely delighted that you accepted to participate at a very, very short notice, and over to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Anita. Almost good evening from Paris to all of you. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this very interesting discussion. Thank you for IT for Change for the invitation. So I imagine that my presence here has also the purpose to further strengthen the discussion related to the human rights perspective of any data governance system that we might put in place. And of course, particularly the relationship with freedom of expression and privacy. So let me use my 10 minutes to try to articulate these different elements. So first, very important for us to keep in mind the individual but also the collective aspects of those two rights, freedom of expression and privacy. From an individual point of view, the right of the individuals both to freedom of expression, and also reminding that freedom of expression is the right to speak, free speech, but also the right to access and to receive information, etc., including data. So it's a comprehensive right that has those three different elements: seek, receive, and impart. And then the right to privacy, with more straightforward connections with data availability and data about ourselves and so on. Here, very important to note that quite often we talk about those two rights as if they were in opposition. But we need to always remind back them from the Snowden revelations. The special rapporteur for the UN system at the time emphasized again and again that freedom of expression and privacy, they go hand in hand, not in opposition. Freedom to exercise our freedom of expression, we also need to have privacy and vice versa. So I won't be able to elaborate here, but just to say that this is very important, and several of the human rights components of your initial questions, Anita, the gender relationship, etc., they are very much connected with this aspect. But also freedom of expression and privacy, they have collective implications. Access to public information, the production of data that then become evidence for evidence-based policy making, etc., are all collective aspects of those rights that we need to take into account for establishing a governance system regarding data or different other aspects as well. So here, in the case of UNESCO, we have been insisting with the idea that information, which of course includes data, is a public good. And we have summarized in the Windhoek Plus 30 Declaration three aspects of this idea. First one is that we need to empower the demand for accurate and reliable data or information and so on. And for that, there is no other solution. We need to empower the citizens, everyone, through education, through media, data, and information literacy, and so on and so forth. But only this is not enough. We need also to qualify the supply. So we need to guarantee that better information, including better data, is offered to the system. And here we need to support the data producers and other information producers in many ways, researchers and so on and so forth. But again, only those two things are no longer enough, qualifying the demand and qualifying the supply. We need to discuss the ecosystem. We need to discuss the transmission chain. We need to discuss those that are holding this data and information and so forth. And then in this case, we need to discuss the digital ecosystem, including the digital platforms or the government, some of those big stakeholders that are the ones with most of our data. And here, very briefly, a few key elements that are absolutely essential for a functioning digital data governance ecosystem from a human rights point of view. First, any discussions need to be multi-stakeholder. We need to include all the relevant actors in this conversation. Secondly, it needs to be human rights based all the time. Third, the system should count with independent regulators. So, for instance, data protection authorities, etc., they can't be connected with a political decision. They need to have the safeguards to take independent decisions, both from the political power and the regulated sector. Next important element is transparency and accountability, which should generate better human rights due diligence by design on the different decisions regarding data governance in this system. And of course, we need to protect users and empower them to have control over their own data. So this is a nutshell, the key elements and the key principles that we need to guarantee in a data governance system. Now, allow me to very briefly deep dive in a few of them. In terms of data privacy surveillance, just calling attention that how important this is, particularly for human rights defenders overall and journalists in particular, women journalists even more in particular. Those are the actors that normally are attacked by surveillance systems that don't follow an appropriate human rights-based data governance system. On the human rights due diligence, again, it's absolutely important the capacity of these systems and these companies to develop better risk assessments. And these risk assessments, they need to be very specific to particular situations. My colleague from UNCTAD was mentioning the implications for the climate or for the environment or climate change. So this is one type of risk assessment that needs to be put in place. But for instance, this year we are living in a super elections year, and the implications of the bad use of data and political advertisement for elections, including micro-targeting, etc., can be enormous. So again, very specific risk assessments for important pillars of our societies, for example, in this case, elections. I already mentioned The independence of data authorities is another crucial issue for a functioning human rights-based data governance system. And unfortunately, we are witnessing a backlash against independent authorities. Many countries that had those authorities, they are now trying to change laws and make those authorities connected to a particular ministry without congressional oversight and so on and so forth. So here we need to pay a lot of attention, because without independent authorities, these kind of systems can't function in a way that is protective to human rights and the other elements. And then connected to this idea of independence, the external audit is the participation of researchers and the access of researchers to this relevant data to actually produce evidence about what's going on, including about the data governance, is absolutely relevant. And unfortunately, again, we are witnessing a backlash in this issue. Many of the big digital companies, platforms, closing what were open systems of data access to researchers and becoming much more obscure in this way. So we need to be firm in this particular point in any data governance system. And last issue, the connections of these with information integrity. Those things, again, go hand in hand, the functional data governance with the overall governance of the digital ecosystem to guarantee information integrity. I'm seeing my dear friend Alison there with you. We have worked together as a knowledge partner for the Brazilian presidency of the G20, and in the documents we prepared with the support of RIA, we insisted in this connection between data governance and information integrity, and the final declarations of the Brazilian presidency of the G20 are pointing to that direction, which is interesting. But the overall frame here is how we improve international cooperation in this. This is desperately needed at a global level, but also at a regional level. And again, from a human rights perspective, in many circumstances, how we empower, for instance, regional courts of human rights to understand better how to protect data, or human rights commissions in different regions. These are not simple issues, they are complex. And a lot of international cooperation, international and joint capacity building is necessary here. A final word that is connected to this idea of the G20. Next year, for the first time in the history of the G20, it goes to Africa. It seems an interesting point to connect this discussion of data governance with the particular needs of different regions, in this case of the African region, and the African Union is also very much interested in this conversation. So we are in a very, very interesting moment with lots of opportunities, but also immense risks. So we need to pay attention. And again, sorry if I'm being repetitive, but from a perspective of the universal system of human rights, including UNESCO, for us, the key driver here is how we keep the human rights principles in any conversations in reshaping the governance of the system. Thank you so much. Back to you, Anita.
Thank you so much. I think not only is data the driver of the economy, but it's a building block of society and sociality. And therefore, it would be good, I think, in any form of global cooperation for us to remember both sides. In fact, I wanted to draw attention to the Global Digital Compact, and as was rightly mentioned, if it is agreed on, Para 36C calls on digital technology companies and developers to continue to develop solutions and publicly communicate actions to counter potential harms, which is really about proactive transparency, including hate speech and discrimination from AI-enabled content. So there is in the GDC a call to action and a kind of appeal to the makers of technology companies and developers. So this is something that should be well noted by civil society actors. Also wanted to say that we have with us today Musna Siddiqui from Global Governance Research and Planning. And one of the things that you have worked on, Musna, from the UN University is also about the Global Decade of Data. And if possible, and if time permits, we request you to also touch upon that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to begin by thanking IT for Change and all the various organizers for convening this very important and timely discussion on the need for a global data compact. We've seen a substantial acceleration on dialogue over this agenda in recent months, and I'm very delighted to be taking part in this panel discussion today. Before we begin, I'd like to take a brief moment to reflect on the historic significance of this current moment, because until date, efforts to govern data at the global level have been fragmented at best, and we've seen various data governance frameworks, most of which tend to be diverging in their nature. So the Global Digital Compact reflects the first attempt by the international community to agree on a shared vision for a collective and cohesive international framework for international data governance. We're at a time where multilateralism is under threat. We're facing rising geopolitical conflicts, the threats posed by climate change, the threats posed by artificial intelligence. Yet despite this, the Digital Compact, the Global Digital Compact, reflects a critical milestone and a significant achievement for our multilateral efforts. We're in broad agreement over the importance of data. It's more than just a critical asset. It is the lifeblood of our global economy and a very indispensable tool for governments, organizations, and policymakers alike. Access to high quality, open, and free data is essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and also in addressing pressing global challenges such as climate change, poverty, and hunger. The importance of data cannot be overstated. The Pact for the Future itself makes references 83 times to data, including in its annexes. And it's estimated that by 2025, the global data economy will be worth 2.7 trillion. This growth can generate new jobs, it can drive economic development, and it can accelerate digital transformation. In Africa alone, data centers could generate up to $7 billion by 2028, paving the way for the continent to emerge as a key player in the global digital economy. Furthermore, research suggests that cross-border data flows can elevate global GDP by 1.77% and also increase exports by 3.6%. However, these opportunities will remain untapped until we build the necessary infrastructure, foster innovation, and enhance interoperability to support cross-border data flows. Cross-border data flows are essential for the digital economy, especially for micro, small, and medium enterprises. It can significantly improve efficiency, scalability, and innovation, while also driving economic growth. However, many governments continue to lack open and interoperable data frameworks, and instead they employ data localization policies, which are motivated by concerns surrounding national security, perceived economic disadvantages, and concerns regarding privacy. Data localization policies prevent local enterprises from receiving international investment. It raises operational expenses by 15 to 55% and stifles innovation. This can be seen by the fact that currently, cross-border data flows between the United States and Asia or Latin America are only half as large between those of Europe and the United States. So we must not perpetuate data divides, whether across borders or within them. Fortunately, in the Global Digital Compact, we've seen a collective agreement amongst member states on the importance of cross-border data flows. Unlike the governance of AI, where many regions are still in the early stages of development, 137 countries have established national data governance frameworks. So the challenge ahead now is to foster interoperability between the systems and ensure that we're promoting effective cooperation. We're in a unique position, and the task before us is to promote convergence amongst these many frameworks. Juan Jose mentioned earlier on the need to promote trust between stakeholders, and this must not be simply between member states, but also include the private sector, civil society, academia, the technical community, and all other related stakeholders. However, trust must be built over time through consistent engagement, transparency, and collaboration. So the Digital Compact's recommendation to establish a dedicated working group to engage in a comprehensive and inclusive multi-stakeholder dialogue on data governance is a very important first step in this agenda. And it can be complemented, as you mentioned earlier, by an international decade for data. International decades are multilateral instruments that can promote global coordination on various issues. And the UN has effectively used international decades in the past to promote multi-stakeholder coordination on very critical subjects, including sustainable energy and disaster risk reduction. So a Decade for Data can provide a forum for multi-stakeholder dialogue and for stakeholders to come together on difficult issues and promote networked, inclusive, and effective multilateralism. It is a medium-term instrument that can help discover issues of common interest and also allow ample time to work through solutions while using an agile and flexible mechanism. It can also serve as a sandbox for testing innovative approaches to collaboration and can have ramification for addressing other global challenges as well. A second solution could be to establish robust cooperation mechanisms that hold all actors accountable for the security and confidentiality of data through the development of a mutual commitment framework. It's important that at the national level, countries should be encouraged to adopt comprehensive protection laws, whilst also promoting security standards to address privacy concerns regarding the security of data. The framework of a mutual commitment framework can enable stakeholders in both the private and the public sector to outline pre-authorized data sharing and processing standards for limited data transfers, while also developing clear guidelines for data actors and intermediaries. It can provide stakeholders with the assurances regarding how, where, and in what context their data will be utilized, backed by a set of agreed upon protections. Finally, public data commons are also another way to promote cross-border data flows because they provide a shared open access repository which can serve as a trusted intermediary and facilitate data sharing for the public good. This model is especially relevant in the case of emergency situations and also ensuring safe and secure data storage while promoting cross-validation of information. Initiatives like the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data exemplify how we can promote cross-border data sharing to further the UN Sustainable Development Goals. However, as we move forward, we must remain focused on three critical foundational factors which will impact the success of cross-border data flows. The first, and this was mentioned earlier in our discussion as well, is the accessibility to high quality and open data. Despite a projected increase in stored data to 175 zettabytes by 2025, there is a significant data deficit in the Global South. Political and legal barriers, funding constraints, language issues, cultural factors, and many other issues often hinder data collection and lead to an epidemic of missing data. The second issue is data and digital literacy, which was also mentioned earlier in today's panel. The disparity in data science capacity is stark. For every one data science in Africa, there are 14 in the Global North. Many countries in the Global South face challenges in developing the necessary skills to collect, store, analyze, and transfer data, which can lead to suboptimal data practices. And thirdly, there is a need for robust digital and data infrastructures. Connectivity remains a significant barrier, as only 37% of the population in Africa is connected to the internet, compared to 90% in Europe and North America. Many developing countries lack the technological infrastructure required to effectively facilitate data collection and transfers. Promoting cross-border data flows must be integrated into a broader context that addresses the urgent need to close digital divides and to foster inclusivity. Going forward, we can consider how to enhance interoperability between existing regional frameworks, such as the African Union's Data Policy Framework and the European Union Data Act. Data can foster innovation, it can drive sustainable development, and it can empower individuals across different contexts. While challenges lie ahead, our collective commitment to collaboration and inclusivity can really help us navigate this complex landscape. And by prioritizing and promoting open dialogue and building trust amongst all stakeholders, we can work together towards a framework that serves the needs of an interconnected world. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Muzna. I also wanted to add a fourth condition, if we could, that it's really important when we talk about innovation from data flows to ask the question by whom and for whom, because it's not just the measure of data flows from Latin America to the US or Africa to the US, or doubling it so that it is equivalent to the flows from EU to the US, but to actually ask who is the innovation by, who are the patents controlled by, and finally who derives benefits from those in terms of ownership. So that I hope will be integrated into the debates. Juan Jose, because you need to leave, maybe I can pause if with permission, Alison and Paloma, is that okay? Just to encourage one or two questions to UNCTAD, since we have the benefit of your presence here from the audience. Yes. Hi, Andrea.
Thanks, Anita. I'm Henriette Esterhuizen, Association for Progressive Communications. I mean, it's really good to hear everyone being so optimistic. I'm not sure I share it entirely. I think I just wanted to ask UNCTAD, but the other speakers as well. You know, on the one hand, we do have this positive outcome of the emphasis on data and the working group under CSTD. But on the other hand, there's this massive investment and outcome and profile for AI, when in fact, in reality, we know some of the really key elements of accountable, public interest-oriented AI governance is about data. Do you feel that there's not a risk that all the attention, all the corporations who want to jump on the development bandwagon, and even within the UN system and member states, that all the attention is going to go towards AI, when in fact, what really matters and really will make a difference is what happens with data governance? Is there not a risk?
Could I take one more question? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much to all of you and Juan Jose for mentioning the impact of digitalization on the triple planetary crisis. No, it's all of them. At FIAN, we have been analyzing the impact of digital technologies together with the digitalization of carbon markets, which is the financial part of it, on rural communities. And we did a study in Colombia on the impact of coffee plantations, which shows that there is a huge risk for the elimination of the right to self-determination, autonomy, and food sovereignty, which shows that we are going beyond the civil and political rights, and that it's needed also to look on other impacts, including on economic, social, and cultural rights, and on the rights of future generations, which require that these impact assessments you are mentioning look into the long term and not only into the short one. So I would like to know if any of the agencies here, and especially UNCTAD, have been focusing also on the social, economic, cultural aspects, impacts that the data management could have. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a request that since you have a time constraint, you take the questions and the rest of the panel can come back later, if that's okay.
Thank you. No, just I think on the speaker in the back, no, we absolutely agree. I think we, from the perspective of UNCTAD, we are seeing, we cannot speak about AI without speaking about data. So that is absolutely clear in our sense. And particularly when we look at digital economy, we think that we should also think of not only the impact of AI, for instance, on production systems, on SMEs, but also before we get there, because as we can see, the development of AI is concentrated in a few places. The impact, for instance, of the entrance in certain markets of the large digital platforms, how that affects, for instance, the small enterprises, or competition between big platforms being able to promote certain sellers above others. So what impact that will have on micro enterprises, on family enterprises, on informal traders, and so on. So there is definitely an interlinkage there. So we're not only, let's say, we already see, actually, in the case, there have been a couple of very high-profile legal cases on what models use what data, and actually owners of that data then taking the developers of AI models to court. So we cannot speak about AI, and eventually there's limits. There's computational limits, but there will also be legal limits about how data is used, because the principles are not clear. And just that, coming back to the example of Colombia, yes, well, our mandate is specifically from the economic side, but of course there is an interlinkage between the environmental dimension and the social dimension, because at the end, it is people who are using the device and using the data and producing the data, but yet it's somebody else who's actually extracting the economic value of that data and owning that data. So this is where we have been saying is where the data is stored and how it is used is the fundamental issue, on how we can extract that development value socially, environmentally, economically for people from the data that they are producing by using the devices through their movement. So the reconciling those two elements, I think that is where Anna spoke about balancing innovation and privacy. And I think a colleague from UNESCO also had a number of very valid points from the political side. So that is where the conundrum of the issue will be on establishing those principles so that things can be used, the elements of data can be used for the benefit of the people that are actually at the end the producers of that data. It is our lives that are captured in the way we use devices and we use the Internet of Things, and how do we make sure that we can also draw a benefit from that. That is where the question that we will have to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are sorry to lose you in the rest of the debate, but we hope to continue this conversation. Thank you for joining us. So I will now turn to the two other speakers. We have Alison Gilwald from Research ICT Africa.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much to the Global Digital Justice Forum, who've partnered with us on so many of these activities around GDC. I think in our participation on this, a lot of us share a number of common positions, but I think we also have somewhat different positions on different things, and I think this is a really great opportunity to try and sort of dig into some of those and see where we are. I think I want to just say that firstly, it is really gratifying, I suppose, to see how data has now been centered in some of these discussions in the GDC and increasingly in the AI for Humanity, the high-level panel on AI, board on AI, which wasn't there in those earlier versions, I think. However, I think since about version 2 or 3, there have been a number of other erosions of very important points that really made some of the linkages between the different aspects that are still in the GDC, but failed to recognize the important inequities in the digital ecosystem, and therefore able to address them. That being said, it's sort of all that we've got. And I think if we don't kind of take this opportunity to try and retain as much of it as we've got, and for it to be endorsed and allow the implementation and work of the CSD to carry on, it will be a lost opportunity. That being said, again, I think, as I said, I think as it stands, as it already is, it is already a little bit of a lost opportunity. I think the Global Digital Compact in the context of COVID was really a call for renewal, for a redressing of the extreme inequalities that COVID highlighted. And I think what is, really surfaced during this, and the Secretary General's, acknowledgement that together with climate change, these are the two critical planetary issues that, if not governed correctly, would exacerbate inequality. And we certainly saw that with COVID. The majority of Africans, and I can't speak for everywhere, but a lot of people in the global south, were profoundly impacted by digital inequality during COVID. They were unable to digitally substitute, to manage the risks, to mitigate the risks, the public health risks, and the economic risks associated with lockdown during COVID, and have been severely impacted in the ability to reconstruct our economies post-COVID because of these inequalities. And I'm not sure that the commitments and the retraction, particularly of financial commitments, solidarity commitments in the document, will really do justice to that call as they currently stand. I think there's, it's important to emphasize that while we speak about the data economy, I think from the floor there's already been mentioned that data is at the heart of everything else. It is, but I think it's important that we recognize that there are foundational infrastructures, foundational pillars, enabling environments that we need before data. And I think if we look at the African Union data policy framework that was referenced, the first half of the document, before we get into a discussion of data governance and the data economy, is around these foundational infrastructures we need, the human capability we need, the institutional capacity we need, and how those need to be correctly contextualized in our own political economies. They simply don't work being cut and paste from mature economies, assumptions around competitive economies, around institutions that have a lot of resources, and around populaces that have high levels of education and human development. And I just wanted to mention that specifically in regard to the points that have been made, around what data could do, what data warehousing could do, what data cross-border flows could do, how our GDPs are going to flourish. Those are completely preconditioned on addressing the fundamental human underdevelopment that we see on the continent. Building of data centers without addressing educational inequalities is not going to be achieved. Cross-border data flows that don't recognize the asymmetrical inequities that exist currently. If we simply open up data flows currently, the 75% of data that flows out of the continent of Africa currently will be even above what it is now. So these technical addressing of standards of interoperability, of course they're crucial. They're a critical element of our African data policy framework, which seeks to create a digital single market, but also seeks to create the economies of scale and scope as a single competitive market that can preferentially discriminate in favor of African data in order to create a common community in Africa. Which I should add, our African Continental Free Trade Area actually inhibits. So there's a lot of coordination that needs to be done there. So I think if we look at these things, as I said, I think we try with our data governance frameworks, and I think there are efforts within these documents, but I think they need to go much further to move beyond ideas of data governance in still largely notions of data privacy, I think as Guilherme was speaking about as well, quite narrow conceptions of individualized notions of data protection rather than sort of collective impacts, systemic impacts that these harms have. But I think very importantly, and I can refer you here to the work that we did within the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence on Data Justice, together with IT for Change, which really extended notions of data justice from social justice notions, but to extend that to looking at issues of economic justice. And I think those are not reflected in the GDC as we've currently got it. There will not be economic justice from the GDC as it currently stands, no matter how effectively that is implemented, because it's not dealing with the fundamental inequalities, the structural inequalities that perpetuate the historical injustices and the conditions under which people, the majority of people in Africa live. I think in that regard, the core wicked problem of the digital inequality paradox that the Global Digital Compact sought to address cannot be met. We've still got, in terms of digital inclusion, largely a language of inclusion of digital divides. We continue to use the language of divides rather than really trying to understand these profound inequalities that we are facing. This is much more complex than the divides we used to have in the voice environment where you simply connected or not connected. And of course, those divides did mean that the more people were connected, the more the inequalities were between those who aren't connected. It's far more complex than that. There's a much higher value attached to whether people are connected or not, and not only whether they're connected or not, but how they are connected. Enormous disparity, inequities between those who are able to go online, transact, and even be productive and contribute to the wealth of their nations. And those people who are barely online, the majority of people who are barely online, able to make what is now called, meaningful communication online. We have this in regard to capacity building. We have this in regard to references that we've got, infrastructure problems, we've got institutional problems, and then we've got human development problems, which are reduced to digital literacy. This is not about digital literacy. And then in the same sentence, we move from digital literacy to needing data scientists. This is about fundamental education, human development, and health conditions. So I think why we want to really very closely address the issue of data as a public good, is to critique the use of the data as a public good within the UN context currently, which equates it. It's essentially a public-private partnership initiative that equates data as a public good only with open source systems. The definition actually says if you've got open source systems, if you've got open platforms, you will get to an open commons, and therefore we will have access to data. And I think it's really important that we use classical economic notions of data as a public good, as these are a critical rationale for public interest regulation. Data is both, has these wonderful characteristics of public goods that mean that they are non-rivalrous and potentially non-excludable. Non-rivalrous, I can use data, doesn't diminish your opportunity to use data. This makes it an incredible resource. This is not oil. It's not a scarce resource. It's a resource that can be maximized for humanity. As long as we narrow those conceptions, it doesn't provide us with a rationale to address these incredible imbalances that many people have referred to. The concentrations of ownership that were referred to there. When there was reference by UNCTAD to the hyper compute centers that are across the world being concentrated in 2 countries, they're no longer only concentrated in 2 countries. And if you take China's state-owned private entities aside, but even those now are not in those top 10 hypercompute are essentially now companies. National operations that were in that hypercompute since February to August have fallen out of those. The investments that Meta has made in the last few months take them into a realm of their own. Even Google and that are much smaller. There are only private companies in that hypercompute. So, I mean, while we talk about warehouses and we need all these things, the scale of inequities is just absolutely enormous. And if this is public, if this is a public good and we're regulating it in the public access, in the public interest, then we can demand access to that data. We can demand access to that data for researchers, for innovators, for local entrepreneurs, etc. And one of the problems at the moment with dealing with this on a global scale is, of course, there are international global governance issues, but there also are issues that are related to inequity that have to be addressed at a national level to realize those public goods at a local level, as one would any other public good, defense or pollution control or something else like that. We've done it with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is globally addressed for the weakest link that exists in probably underdeveloped countries. And the same needs to be done with data. We need to have that solidarity fund extended far from AI. It needs to start with the fundamental data statistics. Data is a public good. We're unable to measure the inequities. We're unable to measure our progress against the SDGs, except that we know we're very far off them. The figures that are used for Africa are based on assumptions, sometimes spurious, extrapolations of data from 54 countries that are very, very different. That data is absolutely critical in building a digital economy, a data economy that has both public value and private value creation for local operators, entrepreneurs, etc. The African Union Data Policy Framework was seeking to allow that flow of information across borders to get the economy of scale and scope within Africa, but to preferentially provide it to local researchers, local entrepreneurs, and between governments. The signing off of the digital protocols in the African Continental Free Trade Area, which adopted an entirely World Trade Organization approach to data, has completely undermined efforts to do that. If we do that, we'll be opened up to most favored nation aspects of international trade. So a lot more to say about that, but I've run out of time, so thank you very much, Anita.
Not at all. Thank you for the most compelling case that we've heard on why I think the debate really needs to be deepened to go beyond ideas of the divide to ideas of inequality and injustice. I'd like now to invite our last speaker, but not the least, Paloma Lara Castro, Policy Director of Derechos Digitales.
Thank you. Happy to continue this conversation. So picking up on the very important points made by Alison, it is essential that policies and practices reflect decades of advancements in human rights standards, especially through the lens of the GDC. This compact does play a crucial role in influencing stakeholders to embrace a greater commitment to recognizing human rights online, both individually and collectively. The development of digital technologies has heavily relied on the massive collection, use, and storage of personal data. With the rise of social media, the Internet of Things, and now artificial intelligence, this reliance of personal data has accelerated. Yet, the regulatory frameworks designed to protect this data have not kept in pace with this development, even in the most advanced countries. This discrepancy, and this can be seen very clearly in Latin America, has created a tension between the push for strong data protection legislation and at the same time the implementation of invasive surveillance technologies, such as facial recognition systems and state security spyware. These technologies not only threaten individual privacy, but also infringe upon freedoms such as movement, association, and expression, ultimately affecting democracy states as well and the rule of law. The international landscapes also reflects stark power imbalances. So citizens in the global north benefit from stronger data and privacy protections, while those in the global south face heightened risks of abuse from both states and corporate actors. Reports from civil society organizations reveal alarming practices, such as collection of personal data from migrants at borders without adequate safeguards. Additionally, we can see that companies exploit regulatory loopholes in global south countries for commercial gain, exacerbating geopolitical inequalities. On the other hand, the issue of cybercrimes adds another layer of complexity. The recent adoption of the United Nations Convention Against Cybercrime raises concerns, particularly regarding cross-border data sharing without adequate safeguards. This treaty mandates that countries assist each other in data sharing for a wide range of crimes, which could lead to abuses and violation of fundamental rights, particularly if these serious crimes are broadly defined without regard for proportionality, which can actually be seen in local legislations. Moreover, the growing acquisition and use of commercial surveillance technology by states, specifically in Latin America, or especially in Latin America, often occur without sufficient safeguards, raising alarms about potential abuses. So broad justification from these matters, typically framed around security or public health, frequently lack throughout evaluation of these technologies' role or its impact in fundamental rights. This makes it extremely difficult to determine where the restrictions imposed of the rights are justified. A critical enabler within this process has been the use of identification systems, ID systems. In many countries, these systems consist of centralized registers that collect and process identity-related data, and in many cases, they condition access to social benefits, thus violating a universal human right. Despite experiences in other regions that demonstrate both the risk of both states and private surveillance generated by these programs, many Latin American countries continue to implement these sort of systems without any safeguards implemented. And lack of independent oversight mechanisms, and this is especially serious in context of institutional weakness and democratic backsliding that we can see is happening throughout the world, but very clearly in Latin America. In fact, in some cases, states implementing those digital ID systems do not even have data protection legislations. Thus, the growing of the collection and processing of data, including data exchange between public and private entities. Several human rights organizations have documented how the adoption of digital ID systems has seriously jeopardized the right to privacy and deepened discrimination in access to essential services, including, for example, healthcare. These impacts are especially harmful to vulnerable populations, such as women, LGBTQI communities, the elderly, and people with disabilities, among others. In this sense, it's crucial to also recognize that there is a gender dimension that is present in data collection. The dimension highlights that data collection does not occur in a gender-neutral setting. The methods used for activities that label and categorize individuals often perpetuate existing binary gender norms. Systems that are developed from such data can reinforce these norms or discriminate against those who do not conform. Moreover, the capitalization and monetization of data underscores how the private sector prioritizes profit over privacy and public good. Past experiences have shown that data breaches disproportionately affect women and gender-diverse individuals due to historical and structural inequalities based on gender and sexuality. These breaches can result in discrimination, threaten sexual and reproductive health rights, and compromise the right to privacy. In this sense, is what we've been advocating within the GDC, that a gender approach to data and datification is central. This approach recognizes that the consequences of data notification, both harms or benefits, are experienced by individuals and communities. It seeks to understand the effect of surveillance and implication of big data on human rights while unpacking discrimination in algorithmic decision-making. Furthermore, it emphasizes the right to privacy and the need for individuals to have full control over their personal data and information online. In response to these pressing issues, we have presented a lot of recommendations within the GDC, but as has been highlighted very precisely by Alison, we need to move further this and think about how what we already have within the compact can advance in implementation and what should we consider within this implementation. There are a lot of recommendations, and I know I have little time, and a lot of them have already been stated by previous speakers, so I'm going to focus on specific ones, that is the adoption of robust legislation on personal data protection and access to information should be prioritized, along with standards to balance fundamental rights to privacy, freedom of expression, and access to information. There is an urgent need to rethink the idea of informed consent, combining it with other data protection principles in the face of emerging technologies. Consent should not serve as a carte blanche. Instead, data protection principles such as purpose limitation and data minimization must be considered minimum standards that cannot be waived or revoked at the time of giving consent. In this sense, when we think about a feminist perspective to inform consent, we must not only think about whether consent is there or is it not, but who has the real possibility to consent and what does that entail. Public and private data controllers must adhere to obligations of loyalty, care, and confidentiality. This includes prohibiting the use of personal data for purposes unknown or different from those originally motivated for its collection. States must establish independent data protection authorities, which has already been stated, but it's important to mention that in some legislations in Latin America, while the legislation provides for these independent authorities, in the practice, they don't exist. So even though there's legislation, there's no independent authority. And this is worsened when there isn't even a data protection law. As mandates of freedom of expression indicate, the interception, collection, and use of personal information must have a clear legal basis to protect individuals against arbitrary or abuse interference with their private interest. The law should then establish limits on the nature, scope, and duration of such measures, along with legal mechanisms for individuals to be able to challenge them. Legal surveillance of communications should only be conducted when necessary and proportional, with oversight and control in monitor of these tools. Any excess must be sanctioned. Lastly, states should adopt legislative, administrative, and other measures with high standards for the protection of personal data and human rights, particularly in relation to cross-border criminal investigations. Criminal procedure safeguards must be respected, including prior judicial authorization for accessing subscriber data, the preservation of strong privacy safeguards, the increased level of privacy protection. In this sense, the UN should champion the highest protection standards and guide member states in its implementation. Throughout these measures, we can move on or advance towards an equitable and accountable digital innovation that prioritizes human rights and promotes justice in all of its forms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for reminding us about purpose limitation and data minimization. I think the whole data Wild West is because we believe more data can fix it. So I will open this up, and just to remind ourselves that we have two excellent resource persons online. So if you wish to, please direct your questions also to Anna and Guilherme. So over to the audience.
My name is Firoz from Daraja Press. I wonder if the panelists would like to comment on the use of technology, in particular AI, to carry out the genocide in Palestine. I'm a little concerned that there has been no mention of the ongoing genocide today in this panel discussion.
We'll take a few questions and then come back to the speakers.
Good morning. My name is Mwendwa Kivuva from Kiktanet, Nairobi, Kenya. How would economic prosperity look like when there's shared prosperity in data? we see when big tech harvests our data, especially, for example, AI data, when they harvest and put in their learning models, what is the benefit that the marginalized are getting from that data? While big tech is taking that data and monetizing it, to access those data sets, you have to buy. When they use our data in their social media platforms, they make money, and you find that in the West, creators are actually paid. But in developing countries, especially the smaller ones, the creators who create content, they never benefit. So there's no shared prosperity in this data that is being harvested. There was an issue that was raised on data authorities. Kenya has a data protection commission and office, and lately we have seen the state trying to create a board for the authority, and the board is being appointed by the line ministry or its government officials, and of course that ensures that the regulators are now not independent. So I think that was a good point that was raised by one of the speakers, and I think it should be part of the recommendations of this event. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Jaqueline Pigato. I am from Data Privacy Brazil. My question is to Ana Neves. I would like to know how the CSTD can engage and work with other stakeholders, with interesting stakeholders in building together these recommendations for data governance, especially thinking about the implementation of the GDC and the actors who are endorsing the GDC, how this can be matched and work together with the states to implement these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you so much for this panel. It was extremely interesting. I would like to flag a couple of issues that I think are important also to bring to the table. To Ana, I would like to ask you about the view of bringing in the discussion the issue of artificial intelligence and synthetic biology as one of the issues that are the most preoccupying for us in terms of data governance and the agenda towards that. And second issue that I want to bring up has to do with the fact that today we're still very sure that 70% of the food in the world is produced by smallholder farmers. Also, some of the populations that are the least connected in the world. And if everyone here in the South looks at what's the landscape of what the kind of transformations that are happening in food production in our countries, we will see that digitalization and database platforms are being deployed at a velocity that is unknown. No, it's the second green revolution. And we are worried about the fact that when we talk about the Global Digital Compact and the kind of transformations that UN-based agenda of digitalization will bring, is not taking in account the kind of transformations that this will bring also to food systems and the kind of regulation and data governance that we will need to ensure the right to food. So I would like us to also to provoke this panel to comment on the issue and what are the challenges that we have in front. Thank you.
So maybe we can take one last question.
Thank you, Anita, and thanks also to the panelists. I just have a very quick question that when we talk about data, data is everything nowadays. We are producing data at the moment. So we can think of population data. We know that we need more gender data. There's social media data that we have enough. The problem is locked in the private sector. We have now synthetic data that's produced by AI. So do you think it's still possible to talk about frameworks that apply to all this type of data? And we can keep talking that we need more data when we know that there will be some consequences in terms of the environment and in terms of the differences in capacities to store and to analyze this data.
So I invite the panelists to just take the questions that you would like to take on. So we start with Ana, and then to Guilherme, and then panelists here.
Well, thank you very much for all the other interventions and for the questions put forward. I was here reflecting on what the Global Digital Compact means and where we are in the discussion of the pact for the future, etc. So the different stakeholders, besides governments and private sector, they feel that they are more engaged and that they have more power than they used to have, and which is a very, very good thing. And I can read in the Global Digital Compact that in the near future we will have more and more different stakeholders engaged in the policy making in multilateral organizations, as it is the case of the United Nations. So one of the very good things that come up from this discussion is that we have, and when I'm saying we, it's the public sector, it's the governments, they have to hear more and more the different stakeholders. But there is one that is very powerful, which is some enterprises that are 5 or 6 in the world, and that they don't care a lot about what is being done here in the Pact for the Future or what is foreseen in the Global Digital Compact, because they know that they are really, really powerful because of money. So we live in a very, we are consumers, and we want always more money, and we are doing everything to have an economy and a society where everybody does everything they think that they have to do to get more money. So it's a bit difficult to go against a society where the main goal is to have more money. Well, we don't have time now to have this discussion here, but it's all about money and to have more and more money to buy more and more things. So I think this is quite complex, and that's why we need much more civil society and much more academia and non-governmental organizations within these discussions, because they help us to go back to square one and to see what kind of society we really want and what are we doing to make a better society and what it means to have a better society. Having said that, in the CSTD, we have a history to have different stakeholders on board. So we had 2 main momenta where we had the different stakeholders on board, and one was on the improvements to the IGF and the other one on enhanced cooperation. So it's very good to have now a big issue like data governance to be a target for discussion in the CSTD, because in the UN family, I think it's one of the commissions that is used to hear the other stakeholders. So I'm very happy, and that's why my positive tone in this discussion is to first, because the GDC foresees a global a working group on data governance, underlying the importance of the other stakeholders to be on board. And I think it will be much better now to have all these stakeholders on board, because they know that they are much more powerful than they were before. So my positive tone, it's because we have the multi-stakeholder approach in this working group on data. That would be very poor in the CSTD to have this discussion only among governments, because at the level of the government, so we have, well, so many bottlenecks. So it's very, very difficult. And with the different stakeholders, it will be, well, a great added value. And we need all these different stakeholders to understand what kind of society we really want and what money means for the society that we really want in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. And may I request Guilherme to please share your views. There were 5 questions. Please choose the questions you want to pick.
Thank you. I will be very briefly. I understand we are running out of time. First, in the first round, I fully agree with Henriette's observation. There is an enormous risk in this AI hype that we are having everywhere. If we pay attention from this side of the equation, that is the output of technology, without thinking about the ecosystem, we are not going to fix it. Of course, it's important to discuss AI, but if we do it well from the perspective of the ecosystem, these will have positive impacts in AI anyway. If you pay attention only on the perspective of the system, of the technology per se, then we won't solve other issues that are related to the human rights, to social justice, everything that we have been discussing here this morning for you in New York, this end of afternoon for us here in this side of the Atlantic. The question from the second question that was from someone from Colombia, if I didn't get it wrongly, just a very brief telegraphic message that UNESCO, of course, is very much concerned with the impacts in cultural rights of these different elements that we are discussing here. And even before AI, if you take the 2005 Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expressions is about this, and it should be applied to all different technologies, of course, with the different challenges that we have now. If you take the Mundial Code Declaration, it's already pointing out to this, and my colleagues from the culture sector, it's not my dossier, they are working hard in making these connections. And maybe let me just make a final comment on, I guess, the last question. I do agree it's a huge challenge to consider a data governance or an information governance discussion, considering the cross-cutting impacts of data and information on everything we do. But it's difficult, but it's not impossible. And I would argue that it's very much necessary that some key principles are embedded in any of those governance discussions we are having. Some of the principles that I have stated in the beginning, I mean, transparency, multistakeholderism, accountability, human rights due diligence, and so on. And then, of course, the governance system itself needs to underline that these technologies or these companies, they should produce risk assessments that are related to specific areas. So these things have impacts on children's rights. Of course, the risk assessment to understand what needs to be put in place to protect children's rights is different of the risk assessment that needs to be put in place to protect fair elections. But in those two cases, again, some common areas are necessary, transparency, multi-stakeholderism, and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's one thing or the other, it's one thing and the other, but the common principles are very much necessary to take this forward. So thank you again for the opportunity, and back to the floor.
Thank you so much. Musna, yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much for your questions. And I think I'll speak to the point that was raised about where the value of data production is going in terms of the fact that in Africa, for instance, we've seen that those who produce data are very less likely to be the ones who are benefiting from its consumption as well. So that is a key challenge that needs to be addressed. And actually referring back to a point that was being raised by Guillaume, I believe, from UNESCO, it's true that data doesn't exist in a vacuum. We need to consider an ecosystem approach, because data has impacts on the environment, it has impacts on finance, on levels of corruption, for instance. So we really need to not separate technology, and here I'm using the word technology because that includes data, but also AI and other emerging technologies as well, that technology cannot be separated from the context in which it exists. It's a tool at the end of the day, which can be used both for positive reasons and also can be used to create instability or to create some challenges as well. So there are certain implications that these implications have been addressed in the Global Digital Compact, and it's been encouraging to see that the co-facilitators in particular have made a very conscious effort in order to link each of the principles and the commitments outlined in the Global Digital Compact to the Sustainable Development Goals, because there is an understanding that we cannot differentiate and we cannot separate these two themes. And in terms of how we can promote that, I think it really is, it's many stakeholders coming together to work collectively on this issue. It's not just one entity that can take sole responsibility in this environment. Governments need to come together, the private sector, the public sector, civil society as well. And this is why multi-stakeholderism is so crucial and so key. And I think one of the most important things would be to implement existing legislation. We have the legislation. It's not as though we don't have it. The importance is how can we ensure that it's being implemented effectively? How can we ensure that, for example, the guiding principles, the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, are they being used by companies when multinationals, when they go to countries in the global south and get them to produce data? And just a quick point on a key issue which I don't necessarily know if it was addressed today, but I think it's very interesting, which is the concept of synthetic data and the concept of structured and unstructured data. There's so much data that is missing, essentially, so, especially data in conflict environments, for instance. That has implications on algorithms, because if the sample size that we're using and if the data that we're using is not reflective of the realities on hand, that the algorithms that we create for AI will be biased, and they will continue to produce inequities and inequalities. So yeah, just to sum up, I think it's very important to continue to have a multi-stakeholder approach and to also contextualize data and technology in the context of the SDGs and broader global agendas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we also need transdisciplinary conversations, because I think the reference that Soledad made was to synthetic biology and the changes that are occurring in the life of organisms which are able to be reproduced in laboratories, and what that really means for information. And your point is also equally significant with respect to synthetic data and what does that mean for reality and the constructions of reality. I just wanted to make that difference, just to point to the fact that there are people from different domains and expertises in the room, and the conversation should really be at the level that we all understand each other. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you. I imagine that there are people in the room who could address the question of the use of AI in the genocide in Gaza better than myself. I just wanted to make the general point, and I know I've seen very interesting work, not just on AI, but on disinformation, and the very cynical use of social networking to move people into apparently safe spaces that aren't safe and are being attacked and that kind of thing. But I just think the very recent events of in Lebanon with the explosion of the beepers, whatever they're called, it's just it's just an example that the technology in and of itself has got all sorts of functions and uses and good and bad, but you have very cynical use, which is now transpiring in the manufacture of these beepers that are used by Hezbollah. Demonstrates how unregulated AI in a defense-producing country like Israel, involved in a genocide, would obviously be put to very powerful use, and basically the ineffectuality of the international system to stop or prevent that from going on, despite the International Court of Justice's decisions on the genocide. just in relation to the questions of what does economic prosperity look like, and the challenges in Africa with large big tech basically extracting value from the continent and very little being there for local entrepreneurs and local innovators. I think the important thing there is that we've had a lot of this discussion around data protection, and I think it's really important that we understand that the notions of frameworks of data governance we're speaking about are both personal and non-personal data, and that there's enormous potential in non-personal data that can be used and that is not being made available to people. I also wanted to speak about the importance of the enabling environment. You've spoken about the regulators and the information regulators being, independence being eroded, and Guilherme made that point. It's an absolutely critical part of the African data policy framework. Significant emphasis is put on creating an enabling and trustworthy environment. We don't get a data economy without that. And it's not just about cybersecurity and privacy data, personal data protection. It's much, much more than that. If you look at it in that context, it's actually framed in the context of rule of law, of legitimacy. And I think many of those crises of legitimacy that's being faced in Kenya are being reflected in these institutional arrangements. Hopefully the benefits of a common economy with an integrated, harmonized rights-based system is really, is going to be a significant economic driver. So I just wanted to emphasize that I think, again, I sort of alluded to it, but what the Global Digital Compact focuses on is very much those first-generation rights, important as they are, privacy and freedom of expression, but it fails to recognize second-generation rights, economic rights, and third-generation planetary rights. And I think this is really what would have shifted the document from a compliance-based to efforts to get some sort of control and regulation to a document that would have really redressed not only the unequal harms or the unequal distribution of harms, but very particularly the unequal distribution of opportunities. And I don't think we have a framework that's strong enough that hopefully, again, in the implementation, we can try and address some of these bigger issues. And just very quickly on the data, and I am also speaking more in a sort of synthetic data context in which the question was, don't we have enough data? Why did we stop now? And I think it's really about the current, again, distribution of data. I think currently these very big giant data sets, and we have fantastic audits done by people like Abeba Berhani and fantastic women African data scientists on this, demonstrate the inability to unbias these data sets. So the whole discourse of ethical and responsible AI, and if we get the right standards and we, have a human rights-based framework that is going to necessarily produce just outcomes, I don't think the evidence is there at all. You simply cannot unbias these big data sets because the majority of the Global South, majority of Africans simply aren't digitized. They're not in the data, they're not there. So there's injustices are by exclusion, by invisibility, by underrepresentation, by discrimination in automated decision-making that you can't fix. Yes, you could for a national data, AI system that you're working, and there are very positive potential applications there of that, but certainly not in these giant models. So I think it's about who's benefiting from those. They're very big, they're very large. My understanding also is that the synthetic data has been seen as a solution because now there's not data's all been used up. But of course, the synthetic data perpetuates those biases that are in the existing data. So we need better other data, not just more of the same.
Thank you. Just very briefly regarding the evolving frameworks that you mentioned, the need to evolve frameworks. First of all, we need to understand that we're not operating on a common basis. The GDC is not going to operate on the countries on a common basis. We have different, as we have been talking about in this panel, different priorities, needs, and problems that are not suffering the same way in other regions regarding, for example, data protection laws, independence on authorities, democratic backsliding, different types of technologies being implemented for different reasons. So the frameworks, it's important that we maintain a human rights perspective on this. And I know this has been said several times, but I think when we look at different frameworks that are being developed at a global level and at a local and regional level, we can see that there's disparities on what we have advanced on in human rights and what is actually on the text on some instruments. When we think about the Cybercrime Convention, again, I mentioned a little bit of my intervention, but when we think about that, and then we think about the GDC, which has certain principles to protect, but then we look at the other convention that is adopted and that not only permits, but enables and promotes data transfer without any safeguards. And I know because I've been part of the conversation of that for 2.5 years, where we insisted on safeguards that are already being recognized at international level, but are not included within that framework. So it's important that we think, how do all of these instruments operate? What is being left only on the formal matter and what is actually being implemented, and how is going to be taken from within the states, especially when there are different priorities and different lack of safeguards within each country. So we think about surveillance practice in Latin America are not the same that in other countries. We think about data protection laws are not the same in different countries, especially in Latin America. We don't even have data protection laws. In Paraguay, where I'm from, we don't have data protection law. One of them is going to be signed up maybe next week, but after 3 years of work or more, Tedik is here, who has been leading those type of discussions. After more than 4 years of trying to generate the minimum of the legislation, is going to pass without the bare minimum and only is going to pass to enable other forms of data retention. So we do need to think about how global frameworks operate in dialogue with local frameworks. So it's important to have common principles. It's important to maintain these principles and what we have gained within these discussions, but it's important to think how it's actually going to be translated into, how it's going to be traduced by the states. And so in that sense, bringing back the multi-stakeholder is important, but then again, thinking within the multi-stakeholder participation, who is actually participating in these discussions? How are we do need to think about strengthening this model. I mean, when we think about accessibility, inclusivity, who has access, what voices are carried out within this discussion. So yeah, we have to strengthen multi-stakeholder, but within multi-stakeholder model, we have to make sure that there is meaningful participation, that we actually are there not only to listen to discussions, but actually being part of the toma de decisiones, how do you say that? Decision-making, not only participation, but decision-making as well, and that we really advocate and make sure that vulnerable communities have a voice within these spaces. So yeah, there's a lot to strengthen, a lot to look forward to, but the bases are there. We need to implement the bases, not to reinvent the wheel, but do adapt them to emerging technology. Thank you.
We are a wee bit late. We started, I think, 5-10 minutes late, but I think it's been an excellent discussion. Thank you very, very much to everybody, especially those online. And thank you for participating. I wish you had been here. And thanks to an excellent audience, which reflects the huge spectrum of issues, I think, that converge with our concerns about data equity and emancipation. So with that, we will hand over to the next session. Please stay on. We have a session on multilateralism from the below, but in the meanwhile, I think you can pick up some coffee and eat. Thank you. Thank you all.